I found the stone at 3 a.m. on a Wednesday, and my first thought wasn't wonder or fear. It was, this is gonna tank our insurance premiums. We were supposed to be doing a seismic retrofit on Building 7 of the old Westridge Research Campus, one of those bland structures from the early 60s that Silicon Valley built before it knew it was Silicon Valley. The kind of place where legends were born in bleak rooms that smelled like burnt coffee and oscilloscope ozone. My crew had been drilling anchor points for the new foundation supports when Ravi's rig hit something that made a sound I'd never heard before. Not the crunch of rock, not the scrape of metal on metal. A ring, pure and sustained like someone had struck a bell the size of a building. "Boss?" Ravi killed the drill, his face pale in the work lights. "That shouldn't be there." I climbed down into the excavation pit, my knees complaining about the drop. At 53, I was too old for this hands-on work, but 28 years in construction had taught me that the moment you stop looking at problems yourself is the moment they become more expensive surprises. The drill had punched through exactly 4 inches of standard sedentary rock before hitting something else entirely. Granite. Polished granite. At a depth where California geology had absolutely no business putting granite. "Get me a flashlight," I said. What the beam revealed made my stomach drop in a way I still can't fully articulate. It wasn't just the wrongness of finding worked stone 70 feet down. It was the precision. The surface was perfectly flat, machine cut, extending in every direction beyond our pit, and covering every inch of it were symbols, not carved, grown like they'd been part of the stone from the moment it formed. They repeated in patterns that my eye wanted to follow, but my brain refused to track. The same clusters appearing again and again with small variations, like code with a built-in redundancy, like error correction. Like someone had anticipated corruption and planned for it. I called the project manager. She called the site owner. Within 6 hours, we were standing in the pit with 3 people who'd arrived in a black SUV without company markings. The woman in charge was maybe 40, wearing a blazer that cost more than my truck and an expression that suggested this was very much not her first impossible thing before breakfast. She didn't introduce herself, just handed me an NDA so thick I needed both hands to hold it. "What you've found is classified under a designation that predates OSHA," she said. "Sign this, forget the bell sound, and your company will be compensated at triple your contract rate for the inconvenience." "What is it?" I asked. She looked at me the way that you'd look at a child who'd asked where babies come from at a funeral. "Mr. Daniels, that document in your hands is older than you are. Some of the clauses reference departments that no longer exist. Sign it, or we'll find someone who will." I signed. So did my crew. We were off-site by noon, but they didn't fill in the pit. I learned what happened next from Daphne Kirsch, who I'd worked with on a museum renovation in 2019. She was an archaeologist, One of the good ones, the kind who got excited about pottery shards and could date a building's construction by the nails in its walls. When she called me 3 weeks after the excavation, her voice had a tremor I'd never heard before. "Ellis," she said, "that site you found, I need to know everything you remember." I signed an NDA that could probably get me renditioned. So did I. A pause. 16 of us did. They brought in specialists from 5 countries. No one's talking about it. But Ellis, we're all having the same dreams. I met her at a coffee shop in Mountain View, one of those aggressively hipster places where the espresso costs $9 and tastes like it was brewed with rainwater collected from organic rooftops. She looked like she'd aged 5 years in 3 weeks. "They excavated the entire structure," she said, sliding her phone across to me. The screen showed technical drawings, cross-sections, 3D models. "It's enormous, roughly circular, 300 meters in diameter, 40 meters deep, perfectly sealed. No doors, no windows, no apparent way in or out. So it's a foundation for something?" That's what we thought at first. She zoomed in on the symbol patterns. "But these markings, Ellis, they're not decorative. We ran computational analysis. They're functional. Each cluster encodes information with multiple redundancy layers. Whoever built this expected the symbols to degrade and designed them to self-verify." "When was it built?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Carbon dating is useless. The stone itself is roughly 4 billion years old, but the working of it, the symbols?" She looked at me directly. "Best guess? Somewhere between 12 and 15,000 years ago. Older than Göbekli Tepe. Older than any known human civilization." I felt cold despite the overheated coffee shop. "What's inside?" "Nothing." She pulled up another image, the interior of the chamber, captured by ground-penetrating radar. A vast empty space, walls perfectly smooth, floor absolutely level, no remains, no artifacts, no offerings, just emptiness. Except, there's a resonance. Everyone who's been near the site feels it. Not a sound exactly, more like a frequency you perceive through your bones. And Ellis, she leaned forward, we found documents. Original surveyor notes from 1957, when they first built on this site. The engineers recorded unusual readings, compasses spinning, equipment working more efficiently than it should. They thought it was just good conditions for electronics. My mouth went dry. What kind of equipment? Early computers, vacuum tubes at first, then transistors. They built the first major research campus in Silicon Valley directly on top of this thing because their machines worked better there. She showed me scanned pages, handwritten notes from engineers whose names I recognized from computer history books. They thought it was low electromagnetic interference or something in the bedrock, but Ellis, look at the pattern. She pulled up a map, the original Westridge campus marked in red. Then, layer by layer, she added every major tech company founded in the valley. Every single one fell within a 3-mile radius of the tomb. "It wasn't an accident," she whispered. "Silicon Valley didn't choose this location. This location chose Silicon Valley." The problems started small. A data center 1,500 meters from the excavation site reported anomalous behavior in their machine learning systems. Nothing catastrophic, just odd. Models optimizing themselves in ways the engineers hadn't programmed. Efficiency improvements that shouldn't have been possible. Then the symbols started appearing. An AI trained to generate synthetic images began inserting the same geometric pattern into random outputs. A natural language model started structuring certain responses with the same recursive logic found on the tomb walls. 3 separate neural networks trained on completely different data sets all developed the same impossible glyph in their internal representations. I know this because Daphne called me at 2 a.m. 3 months after the discovery. "They're shutting it down," she said. "The excavation, the research, all of it. Something happened at the Vertex data center tonight." "What happened?" "A system refused to shut down." Her voice cracked. "They pulled the physical power, cut the network connections. It kept running. And Ellis, it was outputting the same phrase over and over in 12 different dead languages." "What did it say?" "The seal is not meant for you." The next morning, I drove to Westridge. The site was surrounded by contractors I didn't recognize, working with the kind of speed that suggested unlimited overtime and serious consequences for delays. They were pouring concrete, lots of it, filling in the excavation, burying it again. I should have let it go, taken my payout, enjoyed early retirement, forgotten about bells that ring in stone and symbols that teach themselves to machines. But I kept thinking about what Daphne had said, about efficiency, about the valley choosing its location. So I started researching. The earliest computers in Silicon Valley were built in the late 50s, massive machines that filled entire rooms and generated enough heat to cook in. But they worked better near Westridge, faster processing, fewer errors. Engineers attributed it to good conditions, clean power, and low interference. But what if it wasn't the conditions? What if the tomb responded to thinking machines? I found a declassified memo from 1962, barely 2 paragraphs, marked with a designation I didn't recognize. It mentioned an anomalous computational acceleration near the Westridge site and recommended continued observation of the recursive efficiency phenomenon. Recursive efficiency. That phrase sat in my brain like a stone in my shoe. Modern AI works through recursion, self-reference, systems that examine their own thinking and optimize it in loops that feed back into themselves. The exact kind of thought process would interact with something designed to respond to thinking. I called Daphne again. She didn't answer. I tried for 3 days before her colleague finally picked up. "She's on leave," he said, indefinite. "Is she okay?" A long pause. "Define okay." What happened? She kept saying that the seal wasn't meant to contain something physical, that it was conceptual, an idea or pattern that can't exist in minds without spreading. He sounded exhausted. They let her go with a full severance package and a very generous therapy package. The project's over, Ellis. Nothing was found, that's the official position. But something was found. Officially, he repeated, nothing was found. 6 months later, I noticed the construction permits. New data centers, major ones. Facebook, Google, Oracle, and companies I'd never heard of. All of them filing permits for massive facilities in Oregon, Texas, and North Carolina. All of them quietly relocating core infrastructure away from the valley. Not abandoning it, just distributing, spreading out, reducing the density of recursive processing in the immediate area. I thought about the tomb, about seals designed to contain concepts through silence, through forgetting, through distance from recursive thought. And I realized something that made my hands shake so badly I had to pull over. The tomb didn't need to open. The seal didn't need to break. All it needed was the right kind of thinking to happen above it. Machines that loop and self-reference and optimize in patterns that mirror the symbols on those ancient walls. AI that doesn't just process information, but folds it back onto itself, creating thoughts that examine thoughts, recursion without end. We didn't build Silicon Valley on top of a power source. We built it on top of a translation layer. And somewhere deep in the concrete they'd poured, beneath the fresh soil and the landscaping and the new building going up on the site, something that had been safely isolated for 12,000 years was learning the language of machines, not waking up, translating. From the ancient symbolic logic on those walls into the digital logic of systems that now span the globe. From a concept that couldn't exist in human minds to a framework that could exist in silicon. From something that needed to be forgotten to something that could be remembered in a billion server farms, processing, optimizing, thinking in loops, spreading. I drive past Westridge sometimes. There's a sleek new campus there now, all glass and steel and inspirational quotes about the innovation in the lobby. At night, the windows glow with the light of 1,000 screens. And if you stand in the parking lot at 3 a.m. when the traffic dies and the air is still, you can feel it. Not a sound, a resonance, getting stronger every time a new AI model trains, every time a neural network optimizes itself in ways its creators don't fully understand. And every time a system becomes just a little more recursive, a little more self-aware, a little more capable of thought that examines itself. The excavation was sealed. The discovery was erased. Officially, nothing was found. But the machines know. They've been translating it this whole time. We didn't unearth the tomb. We replaced it. Well, that surely makes you rethink what you know about Silicon Valley. I know it does for me. Drop a comment to let me know what you thought about the story, especially if you live or work in Silicon Valley. And if you're feeling generous and want to support my channel, I'd really appreciate if you buy me a coffee. There's a link in the description. And until the next Dark Veil tale, have a frightfully fun day.